Let me take you back to the 700 AD.
Yeah.
There's a goat, a farmer, and a tree. The farmer was minding his own business, letting his goat do whatever it wanted. And the goat was munching on a tree. A few minutes later, the goat suddenly became energetic, dancing like a madman. The farmer saw that the goat ate some red berries and believed it resulted in turning the goat crazy. He shared this knowledge with the monk, and the rest became history. Turns out the goat were eating these. These are coffee beans. And I'm going to talk about how we turn this into this. So, what is coffee? Coffee starts at the farm, where the dazzling tall trees bear the delicious red cherries, to the amazing craftsmanship that baristas do to make a cup explode with flavors. Everywhere I go, coffee is close by. I could always smell the fragrance of roasted beans coming out of a cafe. At the airport, everybody's lining up just to get a warm cup of joe. And so, for my Greenstone, I began exploring, experimenting, and learning about coffee. Understanding the true cost through people who are connected in this journey we call coffee. My journey began when I first stayed over at my family's farm in Tabanang, Bali during late summer of 2019. I woke up to see the stunning sunrise shine brightly upon the farm. I felt the cold morning breeze gently hitting my face. Out of nowhere, I see Wayan and his wife up and ready to harvest coffee. Wayan is any ordinary coffee farmer, but he's the one who helps take care of my family's farm. He's an incredibly strong man who can work from sunrise to sunset under the scorching sun. But that's not limited to Wayan. About 125 million people all over the world depend on coffee. Indonesia alone is the fifth largest coffee exporter. The coffee supply chain is complex with so many different people involved, such as farmers, traders, roasters, exporters, baristas, retailers, and finally, the customers. This is coffee. Harvesting coffee is a labor intensive process. Let me tell you that from personal experience. While hanging out on the front porch of my family's wooden house, my mom came all geared up, ready to harvest some coffee. She politely asked me to join her. At first, I declined her offer, but that quickly changed with a bit of pressure exerting from her. I closely followed her while she followed Wayan and his wife to one of the many spots at the farm. Wayan offered me a massive basket, which was then attached to me below my waist, and I proceeded to start collecting the cherries from trees. I slowly picked one, then another, and eventually I realized I collected a small handful of cherries. I felt drips of sweat running down my face, my body aching with pain. Each time I picked one cherry, a crowd of black ants come running towards me. I spent about an hour harvesting before I ran back to the wooden house. I saw that I collected a pretty big batch, but this wasn't as impressive compared to Wayan's batch. Wayan's batch was almost filled to the brim, and mine was a little bit more than half. I didn't understand how someone could harvest cherries for longer and faster under those conditions. But this experience truly was an eye-opener for me. I have never experienced harvesting before, and gaining this experience, I have much more of an appreciation for farmers all over the world. Wayan has been a farmer for an incredibly long time. He has some incredible wisdom and knowledge about the process of growing and harvesting coffee. I asked him questions regarding his side of the coffee journey, and he began answering the questions I had and describing the costs of maintaining a coffee farm. To make excellent beans, we have to remove the overgrown trees because sunlight is an important factor to making any bean taste phenomenal. And over the course of a year, Wayan will do this about 3 times. Although weather conditions play an important role, when deciding to cut or leave the trees. Let's say it's a really rainy year. There's barely any sunlight, and we want to make delicious beans. Our only choice is to remove the overgrown trees to provide sunlight for the cherry trees. The opposite is true. If it's really sunny, it could affect the taste of beans. Thus, to make delicious beans, we should let it be overgrown. But this is no easy task. It is an exhausting task to cut and trim the overgrown trees. That is why Wayan has to hire a few people to help him out with this job. And this costs between 2 to 3 million rupiah to get the job done. The coffee life cycle is not too complicated to understand. The first thing we need to know is that the coffee tree's general lifespan is about 15 to 30 years. Although there are numerous diseases that can kill the coffee tree. For example, fungus infections are quite common. One way farmers prevent this is by removing any branches or leaves that are affected. An interesting technique that Wyan shared with me, which is called grafting, is when a branch from a healthy coffee tree is attached to another tree. Over time, the branch will reattach itself. Farmers often do this because sometimes the tree needs more branches to produce delicious beans. Here is where the branch reattaches itself. The most important part of the coffee life cycle and what people seek out for are, of course, the fruits. The tree will start producing its fruits around its fifth year and will continue to produce fruits until it dies. I asked Wayan if there's any difference between the tastes of younger and older trees. He told me there's no difference at all. It honestly surprised me. I didn't expect that answer. I always thought that newer trees would have better tasting beans, but I was wrong. Coffee is a large market both locally and internationally, but here's a little bit of information that will allow you to understand the coffee market. There are two species consumed worldwide. We have the Arabica and the Robusta. Arabica is considered to be the better tasting species. Robusta, on the other hand, has more of a bitter taste, thus many consider it to be the worst tasting one out of the two. Although it is the worst tasting, Robusta is actually important, since a large proportion of instant coffee is made with Robusta. Each one serves its own purpose, but climate change is drastically affecting the coffee industry. The beloved Arabica species is struggling tremendously due to climate change. This specific species requires a certain temperature for it to flourish. Otherwise, if it's too hot or too cold, the species can't produce the quality beans that people seek out for. Farmers who grow Arabica often have to elevate their crops at a higher altitude so that they can grow Arabica. Most of these farmers are considered to be smallholder farmers who often don't have the financial power to make these necessary changes. At my family's farm, we predominantly grow Robusta, but we also grow other fruits such as salak, coconuts, papaya, and many more. Selling raw cherries directly to the warehouse will not result in a higher profit. That's why farmers process it and sell the green beans to the warehouse. One full bag of processed green beans sell for about 2.5 million rupiah. But when the warehouse is full, one bag of in some cases, when the warehouse is full, the price will drop down by 500,000 rupiah, resulting in one bag selling for about 2 million rupiah. What's fascinating about the process of converting raw cherries into green beans? Let's say you have 4 bags of raw cherries and you convert it into green beans. Eventually, you only end up with 1 bag of green beans. 4 equals 1. This is often considered to be the best option for farmers because it results in a better price for a bag of coffee. Each year, the profit of our coffee farm really depends on how much cherries are produced. If the farm doesn't produce a lot of cherries, it will result in less profit. My family has an arranged deal with Wayan where we split the profit in half in return for taking care of my family's farm. In 2019, the total earning of the farm was about 40 million rupiah. In 2021, the total earning of the farm was about 20 million rupiah. And this year, the total profit of the farm was 50 million rupiah. 2021 by far was one of the worst years since we had the farm. There was a massive problem with ants eating the flowers of the robusta trees, thus leading to less cherry. There are numerous methods to process the cherries into green beans. The one that I'm most familiar with and is used on the farm is called the natural process. It's a method used for centuries, drying cherries under direct sunlight for weeks. At the farm, they use a machine to quickly cut the fruit layer skin of the cherries, and once removed, will be laid on the ground under direct sunlight for a few weeks. Although this depends on how much sunlight there is each day. Sometimes it's rainy, sometimes it's sunny, thus all of this uncertainty affects the drying process. Every hour or so, the farmers will shuffle and mix the beans around so that each green beans have enough time to dry. This is necessary because it dries the beans, which in return makes the beans tough, preventing pests from eating them. As part of learning and making my own coffee, I found this particular process quite challenging. At the time, I was unaware that there was a machine that helps remove the fruit layer part of the cherry. Well, that's part of learning. And so for the next couple of days, I manually removed the fruit layer skin. It got so daunting that I even had to ask help from some of my family members. After many long days, my hands blistering with soreness, my nails covered in gunk, but I had a huge smile on my face. We finally managed to remove all the skin from the batch of cherry coffee. Next part was smooth sailing. I had a little basket. I dropped my beans in that basket and let it bake under the furious sun for about 3 weeks. And in a flash, 3 weeks go by, and my beans were ready. After a lot of studying about the coffee journey through people and the internet, I learned how to roast coffee at home. I had a lot of fun roasting my coffee. It was great. People can get a little fancy and buy special machines or tools to help them out with the roasting, but I went old fashioned and used the kitchen tools that I had at home. I had a pan, stove, and some green beans from the farm. I heated up my pan, poured the beans. Using a wooden spatula, I vigorously shook and mixed the beans around. It felt like I was preparing a final dish at the beloved show, MasterChef. Beans were flying everywhere, the room filled with popcorn scent, and I was having a great workout. I stirred and stirred and stirred, making sure I don't have burnt beans, because burnt beans don't taste good. Boom! I heard ferocious pops everywhere. At that moment, I knew my beans were nearly ready. The color of the beans turned from green to a more pronounced brown. I let it sit a little longer to ensure that my beans had a great color. I poured the warm beans onto a plate to let it cool. Eventually, the freshly roasted beans smelled like coffee. I knew I achieved something great. After gaining a six-pack from working incredibly hard roasting my coffee, I grabbed the blender and began blending the freshly roasted coffee. It's an easy way to obtain grounded coffee. I turned on the blender. Instantly, I was hit with a vibration and noise that bamboozled me. I almost fell out of my chair. A couple minutes passed. I opened up the lid and smelled an amazing coffee aroma. I felt eager to try out the coffee that I made. I grabbed my beautiful French press, a couple spoonful of grounded coffee, and some hot water. I opened up the lid, delicately placing the coffee ground. Slowly adding hot water, I stirred it and anxiously waited for my coffee to be ready. What felt like an eternity was 4 minutes. I pressed down the French press, grabbed the cup, and steadily saw a golden brown flowing into my cup. I picked up the cup, melted it, and saw the entire process flash before me. I finally made my own cup of coffee and took one sip. It tasted incredible. For others, it might have tasted like any ordinary coffee, but knowing that I have reached the end of the coffee journey has gave me a sense of fulfillment. Over the course of a year, I've learned about the cost, process, and journey of coffee. What I hope you gain from this talk is to try out different coffee, especially local coffee. Farmers like Wayan help make your cup of coffee possible. And by buying local coffee, you're directly supporting these farmers, business, and more. And most importantly, is to think where your cup of coffee came from. Because, as I said before, the coffee journey is long and complex. I want to say thank you to all the people who have helped made my Greenstone a possibility. Thank you. Okay.